Hi, everybody. Welcome back to episode 10 of Through Thick and Thin, discussions about disordered eating with myself, Rachael Mecholsky Pelikan. And today I'm very excited to introduce our guest, Jennifer Kreatsoulas.
So am I. Be here.
Thank you for coming on. So, for those of you guys who don't know, Jennifer has her PhD. She's an author, educator, certified yoga therapist specializing in eating disorders. She is the founder of Yoga for Eating Disorders, which is a virtual space of support and community offering yoga therapy, yoga classes, training, resources. Highly recommend. Jennifer is also the author of Body Mindful Yoga and the Courageous Path to Healing. And her writing is about her personal recovery and yoga therapy regarding her experiences with eating disorders and has been featured to many different platforms. So I'm really excited to have her on today, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much. Great to be with you all.
So for those of us who are, or those who are viewing or listening who don't really know too much about you besides what I just shared, can you share a little bit about your personal history with diet culture and disordered eating?
Absolutely. So for me, this all began in college many, many years ago now. When I went away to college, I joined the crew team. And prior to college, I had been an athlete, love sports, love just love everything about, being athletic and moving and competing. And when I joined the crew team, it was the first time in my life that I wasn't the best. I wasn't the best at something.
Mm.
And that was really hard for me. I didn't quite know how to cope with that. Um, I also had a crew coach who made a comment once to our team that, he could tell how hard we were working by how our body changed. And, you know, I look back on that moment. I don't even know if anybody else heard what he said, but I heard it and I took it so deep down inside. Just
Yeah.
as, okay, I'm not the best on this team. I need to prove that I'm working super hard. Okay, I guess I need to change my body. And it was really the first time ever in my life that that became a thing for me. Um, and it quickly spiraled into full blown anorexia, exercise addiction. Um, and probably a little over a year later, I had to leave college and go into treatment. Um, and so it happened quite fast. And when I got to treatment, it was learning about how perfectionism contributed to my eating disorder, but it was also learning about, there were these big traumatic events that had happened earlier in my life that I never processed. And so this was kind of like, I think the experience with crew was just kind of like the thing that lit the match, for this to all kind of unfold. And it was there, in treatment that I learned what exactly are eating disorders and how they serve as ways to cope with pain and trauma and, not being the best, right? Or that needs people please. So that's where it started for me. And it was, about 5 years after that that I found yoga. And that really helped to take my recovery to a new level. Got me into teaching while I was in graduate school, finished graduate school, got married, became a mom, and had a really severe relapse before my second daughter turned one. Right. So this was in my 30s now. And here I am again going through this process. Very different second time around, but still just awful, right? As anybody knows. And now doing it as a mother, 2 little girls. And then once I got myself strong, that's when I found yoga therapy and continued to work on myself and got to a point where I knew my calling was to support others.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I think, a few things stuck out to me just, from my own personal experience and myself as a therapist working with clients, like that personality trait of perfectionism, and how for so many of us who struggle with like disordered eating, that comes out. But I mean, who likes not being good at something, right? I think the struggle is, we take it to the extreme, and then how your experiences shift and change as you mature and age, and motherhood is introduced into all of that. So, and I know your one book, The Courageous Path to Healing, kind of like talks about all of that, and it's like a really interesting narrative.
Thank you.
So for our viewers who aren't too sure about your organization, Yoga for Eating Disorders, like, can you explain more to them what that's about?
Yeah, absolutely. So Yoga for Eating Disorders, like you said, when you're introducing me, as a virtual community for support and community. I really feel like we heal in community. So every Wednesday, I offer a free support group. Um, it's not a therapy group because I'm not a therapist, but it's a space where people can come together, share what's going well, what's feeling hard, just say out loud, what they know people in the group will understand, get that validation and feel less alone. So we do a lot with the community. But the core of Yoga for Eating Disorders is yoga therapy. So I'm a certified yoga therapist. This is different than a yoga teacher. A yoga teacher teaches a yoga class. Yoga therapist training is much more expansive and extensive, and allows me to be able to work with people one-on-one, supporting them in whatever journey they're on. I focus on the eating disorder journey, and yoga therapy is a wonderful complement to the work people do with their therapist, with their dietitian, with their outpatient team. And it's a way to really bring the body in the process of healing the mind. Even though those things aren't separate, right? That experience of living with an eating disorder certainly makes it feel like the body and mind are very separate. So yoga therapy is a space where we can create tools and practices and use the philosophies of yoga to help with that integration process, and to help people get in touch with their bodies again, to trust their bodies again, create tools to help them cope with anxiety and spinning thinking, use or learn how to apply yoga concepts, say like non-harming or contentment or non-attachment or acceptance, right? How do we take those ideas and apply them in the recovery context? So working with clients one-on-one is just my absolute passion. And then we also offer training. So another passion of mine is working with professionals. Anybody who is in the eating disorder space or the yoga space, or is just interested in learning about the role of yoga in recovery, I offer a training twice a year. So those are kind of the offerings. I have a blog, I have a Facebook group, all kinds of things going on the website, lots of free resources, including free yoga practices and guided meditations. So plenty of things for people to check out and see what resonates with them and their journey.
Thank you for sharing all that information. I think I kind of have an idea of what the answer to this question will be, but how do you feel like yoga has impacted your own personal recovery? And if so, how did that happen?
Yes, absolutely. It 100,000% did. In that first time around, after college in my 20s, I got to a point in my recovery where, I was really missing being active. But it was still very fragile of how do I be active without aggravating or activating the eating disorder, triggering that exercise addiction. Um, and so with support from my outpatient team, we decided let's try yoga. This was back in the early 2000s when yoga was just becoming popular in the States here. And it had never been a part of my eating disorder. It was not anything I'd ever done before. So let's try it. And it started off doing like DVDs in my apartment, and finding my way with it until eventually I ended up in a studio and a community. And I would say at that phase, it was really the physical practice that helped me. It was the first time that I felt this very deep calling to take care of my body and to not overdo it and to listen, and it
Mm.
helped me to, you know, kind of take these terms that I was hearing in class, like compassion and acceptance and, letting go of expectations, and start like figuring out what that meant on my yoga mat when I'm moving my body and breathing and being with myself. And, it certainly wasn't a straight line. There certainly were ups and downs with it. But once I found my footing, and found how this practice was helping me to kind of rewire my connection with my body in a very respectful way, it was very powerful. And then later in life, after I had my relapse and I went into study yoga therapy, the school that I went to taught classical yoga, which put a lot of emphasis on yoga philosophy. And while I had heard some terms earlier in the journey, it was when I was in my yoga therapy training that I really, really got a deep dive into these beautiful philosophies that I feel are such incredible vehicles for healing. And I think it was learning those things that really helped me understand recovery as a practice and how we can bring those concepts into our daily life to support our
Mm.
practice of recovery. Um, it just was transformational, absolutely. And so my work as a yoga therapist, I make an effort to always be bringing in concepts with my clients, because I think when we merge the concepts with the physical, it just takes it to a whole new level.
And I think that's, the common misconception about yoga, especially like in Western culture. It's just the physical, like asana practice, and not really looking at the other pillars that, where the physical practice is just like one tiny part of this. Um, so I do think like that's interesting how, you know, uh, being an athlete and then like wanting that physical nature, that's kind of what brought you in. Like most people, I think, and then draws them in, and then they're more interested moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's certainly some people in the recovery process, who, for like that movement is just too much, like,
Hmm.
or it just doesn't resonate, or it's not their kind of embodiment work, and that's okay. But they find a lot of power in learning how to breathe, or
Hmm.
the meditation, or the philosophies. I have some clients who we hardly do any movement. And when I say movement for a yoga therapy session, I'm talking about like very gentle. This is not about a workout, right? We might just be sitting in our chair doing some gentle movement for 10, 15 minutes, or a recline practice or seated practice. It's, and we're bringing in themes that are important to them and what they're working on in their life. But yeah, for some, the asana, the physical postures, are not even part of it, and that's okay.
You mentioned that, I guess, you had an exercise addiction, or you were a very intense athlete. So what did your timeline look like from when, you struggled in college, or you went into treatment that first time, and then, um, you know, up until your second time in treatment? Like, what did your relationship with movement look like throughout that time?
Um, so it was, I think, I got into my yoga practice at a time that it was safe to do that, and maintain that practice, you know, let's see, for good 10, 12 plus years until I got married. Now I'm not doing the math so quick in my head here. So it was a good sustained amount of time. And when I got married, you know, my husband was an athlete too, and I found myself being able to run again. Something I thought I would never do, because every time I tried, it was just too many landmines, I kind of got myself in trouble every time. But then having a partner to do that with in a very supportive way really helped me to kind of integrate that back into my life. Same with, cycling, and we'd hike and do a lot of activities together. So having him and that kind of support was like a way that I was able to return to more, I guess, to more types of exercise that I thought I would never do again.
That's great, having that support and kind of shifting the purpose or motivation for that movement.
Yeah.
So you talk about, your relationship with your husband. I'm also curious about, you mentioned your relapse and being a mother, and how do you feel that impacted your recovery or the lead to your relapse?
Yeah. I mean, motherhood is incredibly overwhelming experience. I'm sure anybody who's a mother can understand that. And I think in that overwhelm and that time in my life, I just lost myself. And I wasn't practicing yoga. I wasn't really. I mean, I was taking care of two babies, right? So my girls were years apart, and so I just really lost myself in that. I also suffered with really bad postpartum depression, especially with my second child. And I would, and please, like, understand what I went through had nothing to do with my babies. Like, I loved and love my babies. There's no way to measure how much. It was more of my internal experience of just feeling so lost and overwhelmed and sleep deprived and depressed, and the whole mix of it all. And it was 10 months after my second daughter was born that I ended up in treatment. It just took hold really fast after she was born. And I breastfed for the first 8 months, so I was very conscious of making sure I was taking care of her. But that thought process was like, it almost was like I gave birth and like the anorexia just took control of my brain again. And I just found myself in that place, and it's such a slippery slope, as you know. And I remember, when my babies were little, I'd have one strapped to my chest, pushing the other when I was on maternity leave, and walking twice a day for hours at a time, and just finding all the hills to walk up, and just, convincing myself, oh, this isn't a clinical eating disorder. This is just, whatever I was rationalizing it was. But it just, it just can just sweep you away so fast. And it was very painful to leave my husband and my baby.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's heart-wrenching. And I was in treatment for both of their birthdays, turned 3 and 1. But they were the reason. I just didn't want to be a chronically ill mother. I didn't want to be, just wasn't fair to them. And the way I wanted to model, I wanted better, like, for myself, for them. I wanted to figure out, like, okay, these stressors aren't going to go away. So I got to figure out a way to cope with them without nearly killing myself. Like, that's not okay for my family. So they were a big motivator, the biggest motivator. And I can remember being in treatment and sitting at lunch one day and just crying over my food. And it's like, take a bite from my oldest daughter, take a bite from my youngest daughter. Just get through it. And they're my huge motivator. So grateful for them.
What advice would you give like a new mother or any mother who is struggling with an eating disorder?
I would tell them that, their struggle is valid. Struggle is valid. You're not being selfish for having a struggle. You're not wrong for having a struggle. I remind people that, life changes and transitions are natural times that eating disorders can resurface, right? And so give yourself grace for that and get support. Get support. Make room for yourself in your life and address it. Don't let it just keep sweeping away. You deserve to take the time, even as you are a mother, to attend to yourself.
I think what you bring up, is so important with the mom guilt and the pressure. I think even like specifically on women for their children, it's like if you take this time for yourself, even for something as imperative as treatment, it's deemed as selfish, or like how could you leave your kids, and all of these like external societal standards, as well as like the internal struggle with that. So I feel like, especially when I work with women in particular, like mothers, it's really hard for them to put themselves first in those scenarios.
I know it is really hard, and we can talk ourselves out of it over and over and over again. But at the end of the day, like, our children are looking to us
Yeah.
to learn how to be in the world and how to be in their bodies and how to be with food, how to be in relationships, right? And so if you can't initially do it for yourself, do it for them.
Do you see yourself approaching food and movement more carefully, or anything like comments that you make to your children, or the way that you raise them to view food and wellness?
Yeah, I mean, there's no good food, there's no bad food. We don't talk negatively about our bodies. We don't talk negative about anybody's bodies. We don't comment on bodies, right? Like, all bodies are good bodies. And we just try to keep food as a neutral, like, it's neutral. This is something yoga philosophy taught me, right? So reality is neutral. Everything in reality is neutral. It's the stories that we bring to it that creates the emotional charge, right? So food, whatever food it is neutral. It's whatever stories I bring to the food that create my suffering, right? So we try to talk about, food as neutral. We're aware that some foods we want to be, they're not all the time foods, but they're foods that we enjoy, and they're just as important as the foods that we have more regularly, right? Like, it's not a moral issue. It's, awareness of taking care of ourselves, nurturing ourselves, nourishing ourselves. Our bodies deserve food, our bodies deserve to enjoy food. We deserve to enjoy food, to make memories with food. So it's just not a moral issue, and I don't use any of that language, but I don't even use it with myself either anymore. So it's not like a performance for my kids. It's something I've learned for myself, and now for them.
And I'm assuming too, like your partner, your husband, has to be very supportive and on the same page for you guys to parent in that way.
Absolutely.
How do you normally handle if, like one of your kids comes home from school and says, Sally said this at lunch, or whatever it is, if there's, people in their lives that are out of your control, do you have a conversation with them about that?
Well, it's interesting because my oldest daughter is now 13. And I know that she's been exposed to some disordered eating with her friends. Just things that I've observed with friends, and comments that she's made. Um, and so, of course, my internal reaction is like, oh no, like fear.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, like I don't want my child to learn these behaviors. And then I try to have compassion for the other the children that are having some
Yeah, of
challenges.
course.
It's not their fault. And I kind of will just ask some questions like, oh, what was said, or how did that make you feel, or you know, just like simple questions. I can't think of, you know. Um, and then after like a few of these kind of examples have popped up, I'll make a point to sit down and be like, hey, just you know how to listen to your body. Make sure you're listening to your body. And I recently confided in my oldest daughter of my story because she's seeing more things
Yeah.
with friends and very aware that you turn on the TV and every single commercial is an ad about losing weight. And let her know that I'm a resource, right? So if she sees things that concern her about her friends or make her afraid, that she can come to me. If there's things going on with her, like with food or her body image, she can come to me. So having conversations about like what are we seeing on TV and what are these messages that we're getting, and how is she responding to them? Like what's that bringing up inside of her? So just keeping the dialogue open, without projecting or going into fear that like, oh no, now my child has an eating disorder. It's it definitely makes my heart stop when these things come up.
Yeah, I can imagine. But I think it's, obviously, I'm not a mom in that sense, but even when like I work with clients and I think like practicing, like living your practice within recovery. And I always say like I never want to be a hypocrite, or like I want to take the advice that I'm giving people. So I think kind of what you were saying earlier, like this isn't a performance for my kids. This is something I live by. And I think what I struggle with, I work with a lot of like teenagers and kids and things like that, and more the early stages of eating disorders. And there's even a lot of parents, and this isn't to shame them, but to just show like how deep they are within their own struggle. It's like, they don't want to take the scale out of their house because they still use it, but their child isn't allowed to right now within this process. And it's like, but what example are you setting by still getting on the scale every week when like your daughter sees that and she knows she can't? So it's really hard for people to break that cycle, and it's really uncomfortable. So I'm wondering, I'm sure there's multiple things, but is there something you would say has been like the most beneficial, or a few things that have been very beneficial to your recovering with your eating disorder and body image?
Yeah, certainly yoga. We talked about that. Having solid support systems at different times in my life. I think this is a process that if you're fortunate to not have to go it alone, don't. I know I'm speaking from a privileged place because I was able to go to treatment. I have been able to have, an outpatient team at different times in my life. So I do acknowledge that. But support can look at a lot of different ways, right? Support could be your church community. It could be a book club. It could be friendships. It could be teachers. It can just having some semblance of a solid support, so that you don't have to do it alone. And I think also at different times in the recovery process, support that you can set up accountability with, right? So that you keep showing up. You have to keep showing up. Sometimes we need that person on the other end of a text message or a phone call or a Zoom call to be able to say, yep, I did it. It was hard and it wasn't pretty. I cried the whole time, but I I did it. So I think, support, accountability, um, letting go of timelines, you know, um, there's no timeline of recovery, and letting go of recovery as an idea of a destination. When I was able to be like, no, recovery is like the choices I make today, and that's the only thing I have to worry about, versus recovery is getting to the top of the mountain and landing in some place that means something I don't even understand,
Yeah.
or can imagine. So really just coming back to today, and it's about your choices today. And the last one I would say is repetition. Like, the more frequently you can make the choices that align with your recovery, the easier it becomes to keep making those choices. And before you know it, or I shouldn't say it like that, with time and repetition and support, those choices start feeling easier and easier and easier. Right. So I think recovery, we can think about recovery and intellectualize recovery and all of it, but it's really the actions. It's really
Yeah.
about actions, so yeah, choices, actions, accountability, support.
There was something that I guess came up on like my social media feed yesterday, and it made me think of what you were saying kind of within recovery. It's like, it said first it was an intention, then it's a behavior, then a habit, then a practice, then second nature, and then simply it's just who you are. And I think it's really hard to see that or imagine that when you're so deep into any type of disorder or struggle, but knowing like over time it is possible if you like continue to take those small steps.
Absolutely, truly is.
I know this is kind of piggybacking off of what you were just saying, but if there's anybody who is interested in addressing their struggles with disordered eating or diet culture and they don't know where to start, like what advice would you give them?
Perhaps, speak to a trusted person in your life about, what you're experiencing. And maybe through that opening up, the answers will kind of show themselves of like, okay, maybe I need to reach out for a therapist, or maybe I need to go online and see if there's a book that, I can read. Maybe see if I can find some stories of other people with a similar situation, right? Or maybe, if I have a hunch that it's an eating disorder, um, you know, find an eating disorder therapist or get to a doctor to kind of get that diagnosis going so that you can get the care you need. Um, you know, just don't let it be a secret. I think that's
Yeah.
we can get lost in it, and um, there's nothing shameful about suffering. It's not something you chose. You know, this is real. It's valid, and there's a lot of support out there. So you don't have to go it alone.
Yeah, community is so important, and once it's out there, just vocalizing it or externalizing it can really shift everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, so much for joining and for being like so open and authentic about your story. And for those who are viewing or listening, it was a pleasure having you on today.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. It was great being with you all.
And I am going to link as well if you're interested in learning more about Jennifer's organization, Yoga for Eating Disorders, or just more about her in general. Her website, yoga, the number 4, eatingdisorders.com, but I'll link everything for you guys. So thank you so much, and make sure to tune in the first of the month for the next episode.